Art is the soul of life, and the old Absinthe House is the heart and soul of the quarter of Old New Orleans. Keep always this dim corner for me, that I may sit while the green hour glides, a proud pavilion of time. There is a corner in the United States which time has overlooked. It lies in New Orleans, between Canal Street and Esplanade Avenue, the Mississippi for its base. Thence it reaches northward to a most curious desert land, where a cemetery is lovely beyond dreams, its walls low and whitewashed, within which straggles a wilderness of strange and fantastic tombs. And hard by that is that great city of brothels, which so cynically mirthful a neighbor. Here, too, are the marble basins, hollowed and hallowed by the drippings of the water, which creates, by baptism, the new spirit of absinthe. I'm Laura Bellucci, and we are in Belle Epoque, which is an absinthe lounge that is inside of the old Absinthe House. Absinthe House service is right on Bourbon Street, so it's a little crazier, a little faster. They do fire service out there with the absinthe, which is sort of like a bohemian way to serve it. And then in here, we get a little more in depth, a little more history heavy, and a little more involved with the explanation of absinthe, because you have a little more time in here. When you trace everything back to the beginning, you see that there's a structure here in 1806, and that begins the history of this building. It was owned by the Hough family. They were from Spain. They came here. They owned several little, smaller groceries all over the city, and this was their main storehouse. So this is where they would have kept all of their goods and supplies. The building style is called an entresol building, which means basically that it's a building that appears to be 2 stories from the outside, but there's actually like a mid-level story, and that would be the secret floor that everybody talks about, the entresol or enter sun level, which was rumored that the pirate John Lafitte met with Andrew Jackson to unite on the Battle of 1812. And that's like the famous story of the entresol. Do we have a lot of evidence to prove that? No, but is it an amazing story? Absolutely. So that being a storeroom, and then a grocery down below. This was also a shoe store and a barber shop for a while, but mostly it was a goods and sundry store. And in 1861, we have a bill of sale for some pretty important stuff that entered the building, namely our marble fountains, which are from then, but would have had a life before then, as fountains in a soda shop. So like carbonated water would have been pumped through those in a central location. That's why they have spigots all on every side. Central location to feed soda water into people's sodas. And then that was bought and repurposed as an absinthe fountain a little later. So the Hough family also ran a bar out of the French Opera House, which is where they met Cayetano Ferrer, who was a kind of well-known bartender from Spain at the time. He was bartending over there. He eventually came over here, started running it, and owned the business for a long time. And he was the one who popularized the absinthe drip Francois, which is what we were talking about before, the sort of style of service where you're very carefully dripping water over a sugar cube into the absinthe. It was very European, and he was basically the one who started it in New Orleans and brought that style of service here, which is pretty cool. As we move into the 1900s, absinthe's getting more popular in America, and New Orleans is the second largest importer of absinthe after Paris. So this is a big absinthe city at that time. People drinking a lot of it, as a pastis, as a little aperitif. They're drinking it. In 1912, absinthe was banned, and there was a huge sort of movement across Europe that spread here, and everyone was signing these petitions to have it banned, that it was the devil's spirit, that it made you go crazy, that it made you lose your mind. Obviously all propaganda by big wine companies a little bit, and also by the sort of prohibition movement that was gaining traction in America. Then in the 1920s, we have the bar shuttered, this building shuttered for a year. It's the only time it's ever been fully locked down, except for COVID-19. And yeah, it was started from 1926 to 1927, I believe. And during that time, the owners, unaware that there had already been a deal made to sell all of the contents of the bar to Pierre Casabon, tried to sell all of the contents of the bar to the Historic New Orleans Collection because they kind of thought Prohibition was going to last forever and this wouldn't be something that would be opened back up, as it was the nexus of the most evil spirit in the entire city. And then they came to get the stuff, and as soon as they unlocked the doors, Pierre Casabon walked in, grabbed all of the accoutrement and moved it up the street to 400 Bourbon and opened the old Absinthe House bar right up the street, which makes the history kind of confusing to sort through because you almost never know which one they're talking about once we get past that point. And then for a little while during the Prohibition times, they were like serving in here, but very illicitly. Madame Kelly opened it as Kelly's Tea House in the 1930s. Obviously, they were serving more than tea. It was a pretty bawdy, crazy establishment, and she felt like New Orleans had too many rules, so she moved her operation down to Panama City to open a much wilder version of a tea house and dance hall there. And that was famous in its own right. And then we move in the 40s into the Brennan's era. One of the most famous restaurant families in New Orleans, Ella Brennan. Her very first job was ordering whiskey for this building right before they bought Brennan's across the street. It was a full restaurant, serving lots of food, doing lots of business, but they ended up moving out of here because the space was just kind of too small to operate a full restaurant, and they really wanted to expand into food. And so that is how they got started in this spot. After the Brennans, it was owned by the Morans from the 1960s until the late 1990s. The Morans were another sort of famous like family of characters in New Orleans, local boys. The patriarch was named Diamond Jim Moran, and he used to put diamonds in his meatballs for press photos and like was a very flashy guy. His sons ended up taking it over, calling it Tony Moran's, and then we get to today. Our owner, Jobert, worked for the Morans and ended up buying it from them in the late 1990s, and then acquired 400 Bourbon Street, which was the old Absinthe House bar, and was able to take all of the fountains and everything back to this building, their historic home. My dream plan here is to put the historic guest ledgers on display. That's another part of the history that a lot of people who are in the historic community get really excited about. I personally get really excited about. We have 11 guest ledgers that span from the 1910s to the 1940s of everybody signing in here. So theoretically buried in those could be like Aleister Crowley's signature. We found the signature of a silent film actress, and I can't wait till we can put those on display. We just have to make sure that we're really careful about it. It's sort of like a fancier entertainment district. This wasn't just like daiquiris and chaos. I mean, it was sexy. There was like tons of burlesque, tons of crazy shows, but it was all sort of formal and fancy for a long time. So there's a precedent for fancier things happening here, and you see little stuff popping up, like Bourbon Bar is another place to get great cocktails. But I always think there's going to be that mix. There's going to be that neon and the daiquiris, and I like being a sort of respite from that amongst the chaos. But you got to love the chaos a little bit to be on Bourbon.